Okay, so I have two more of these type of problems. This is the type of problem I put on an exam question. I'm simply asking you to find the inverse. I'm going to also ask you to find the domain and range at the end of this. But I always start with finding the inverse function first, obviously. So we set it equal to y. Some of you are probably going to combine these first two steps. Then we replace the y with the x and the x with the y. And then it's just a matter of solving for y. Now this is about as difficult as they get as far as the problems go in this class, or in this section at least. So we're going to get go ahead and multiply both sides, get rid of the fraction, multiply both sides by y plus 3. We need to distribute. That gives us xy plus 3x on the left, y minus 5 on the right. The goal is to solve for y. So the suggestion is to get all the y's grouped together. I always group them on the left. So I'm going to subtract the y from both sides to cancel it off the right. I'm also going to subtract the 3x to get that off of the left side. So I'm moving stuff around, basically. I want to move all the y terms to the left and all of the anything else to the right. Okay, now there's two more steps to this. You notice that there's two y values. There's two y's showing up in this problem. So this adds an extra step to our process. This step is actually a factoring step. So if you have a y in both terms, you can factor it out front. And again, that's something we did on the first night. You may not remember it too well, but we did do it. So we've got to add that factoring step to this one. So we get y out front. And then to get y by itself, all we got to do is divide by x minus 1. So we ended up with y equals negative 3x minus 5 over x minus 1. And I'm not going to circle that because it's not written appropriately. It's not written in the proper notation. So I would encourage you always to write it with the function notation. The inverse function is negative 3x minus 5 over x minus 1. However, this one has several other perfectly acceptable solutions. And this happens with the assignment sometimes. You may be going through your homework and checking your answers with mine, and your answer still might be correct. So you notice what I just did there is I changed the sign on every term. This was a negative, that was a negative. I made it a positive and a positive. This was a positive, I made it a negative. This was a negative, I made it a positive. So if you wish to, you can write it in different formats, basically. Different answers still mean the same thing. So that's something to be aware of, and don't get frustrated too much on your homework if your answer doesn't match mine exactly. We could rearrange things even. If you wanted to, we could put the 5 out front. You could put negative 5 minus 3x on the numerator. But as I said, I'm going to ask you for the domain and range of everything as well. Domain of f inverse. And I'm not going to try to trick you on the exam. I'll do it in the same order because I think there's a pattern to it. At least that's the way my mind works. So the domain of the original, we're going to go back up to the original. The original function had an x plus 3 on the bottom, so that means x cannot be equal to negative 3. So that's our domain restriction for our original one. Then I'm going to slide up and look at the inverse function. So our inverse function had an x minus 1 in the denominator. Well, that means we can't put a 1 in there. X can't equal 1. So that's our domain restriction for our inverse function. Yeah, x, that was a 1. So then, to finish it, the domain of the original is the same as the range of the inverse. You just have to change it to a y instead of an x. Because remember, range represents your outputs or your y values. So the domain of the inverse is the same as the range of the original function. So that's the type of question I think I assigned number 96 asks you to state the domain and range after you find the inverse.